Thank you, David. That reading, of course, consists of several objective evidences that demonstrate the reliable testimony of the early church about the resurrection of Jesus. So we'll keep that in mind when we get to a section of a presentation that I began this morning in Bible class that may even go through this evening's worship hour, not all at once. We'll have a break of an afternoon and allow us opportunity to think about Christian evidences. Before we go back to this study and proceed with the things we were looking at this morning, let me say thank you to Chris for that fine opening prayer and for the very kind comments that he made and petitions on behalf of your servant. But he also prayed that we might grow numerically. And I've mentioned this before and will remind us, we may not be ready. Are we? Are we ready? That's perhaps better formulated as a question. Growth is messy. You can't maintain the status quo and grow. And growth brings about conflicts. You have people all bunched together in a small place in particular. People with different ideas from our own. Well, you know, the cemetery is the most peaceful place in the county, I guess. Not much happens there. And we could say if we were dead, we would be totally at rest, totally peaceful. But growth is messy. And yet we still pray for it because we know what it means. We want to grow. Well, as we think about it, let's get ready. Let's just get ready. No reason for us to bemoan the fact that it will be a challenge. Let's prepare ourselves for that challenge so that God will grant us our petition. If we're not ready, He probably won't. Now, I want to go back and look at the theme that was raised this morning. This is a review of material studied in the past, but my idea is this. We need to go back over this because I'm looking at the broad outline of this presentation and hoping that each and every one of us will become more and more cognizant of this basic outline. We will be aware of it, make it a part of our own thinking so that we will have it readily at hand when the question arises, why do you know that there is a God? Or when someone asks, why are you a Christian? What are your reasons? Or any such related matters. We can go to the issue, we can focus on it, and hopefully some of this will help us. Now again, it's of the nature of an outline, which means we're just looking at the basic, broadest points. I'll try to fill in a few details, to give us an idea of what lines to pursue. But much of this will depend upon your own reading and study. Let me say up front, while I'm thinking about this sort of subject, apologetics, can involve all kinds of people, and it does. You have those who spent their lives in the classroom, and they've gone out and earned these degrees, which in many cases is a bunch of hot air and is a lot of vanity. But it does reflect some work done in the classroom. Is that the only place you can learn? Obviously not. You can learn a great deal on your own, and there are many self-made men who are scholars in their own true right, who haven't done a lot in academia. No matter, they've spent their time studying and reading. You have farmers in the field who've been plowing and working the land all their life, who are really adept at giving the right kinds of answers to the questions that are typically raised. Why? They think about those things. They're interested in those things. Make them a part of their own thoughts. So it doesn't require a PhD or any kind of degree formally to be a capable apologist or defender of the faith. And God be thanked, that is true. The early church grew not by PhDs, but by just average people who were sharing their knowledge of the public truths of Christianity. The kinds of things David just read for us. The sort of objective evidences that were used to demonstrate that Jesus is the Son of God. This morning, we looked at the fact-value distinction that our society tries to make. And we have found it's a myth. It's a false dichotomy. Christianity is not just a bunch of values that we hold in private. Christianity makes affirmations, claims, truth claims that we believe are true for everybody and not just for us. Not just meaningful personally to me. Now, I'll not go back over that material, but reference it, and if you get a chance, perhaps you could view some of that in the archives of the video of this morning's presentation. But now I want to move from that point and the issue of how we know anything the question, of course, was that this morning, and we resolved that we can know with assurance that Jesus is the Son of God, to the way we could proceed with this argument. Now, you have to start from the very beginning, literally. To know what I am, I have to know where I came from. And it won't do just to say immediately, well, your mother and your father, because that question is quickly pushed back to the next. And they, where do they come from? Well, their mother and father. And obviously you can see you can't keep asking that forever. You have to jump out of that line of questioning and ask, where did all mothers and fathers come from? Where did all human beings come from? And this is the issue of origins. To ask about the origin of life, you need to know something about the origin of the world, the universe. You don't have to know everything, thankfully, but we need to have the proper grasp of where we came from to be able to know why we're here. Now, doesn't that go without saying? Do you have to really think deep to see that? I think everybody appreciates it. If I'm here because of a colossal accident in nature, if nature is all there is, and there was just this fluke of chemistry, and that's the only reason all life exists, it had no purpose, and therefore I have no purpose. I have no meaning to my life. Well, I can make little meanings here and there, but there's no broad meaning overall. If I have no meaning, at the end, there's nothing to look forward to. I have nothing to anticipate after this life. So the question of origins is basic. Everything else flows from that question. Now, how do you resolve it? Well, I can only think of two alternatives. In my reading and in hearing people lecture about this over the years and in conversations, I've heard others propose different alternatives. But when you consider those alternatives they propose, you realize they finally fall back into one or the other of the broadest. I'm going to mention that the only two ways you could possibly explain how we may have gotten here is by naturalism on the one hand, supernaturalism on the other. Now, naturalism is also called materialism, from the word material that's related to matter. And it holds that all there is matter. All there is nature, the physical world alone. Naturalism, materialism, would not say there's anything above or beyond the material. Nothing below or beneath the material. It's matter all the way down. So the laws of physics and chemistry and so on that you study in science are the laws that explain everything. There's nothing else. There would be no soul, no spirit in the human, not anything separate from matter, and nothing after death, because when you consider it, once our bodies disintegrate, there's nothing left of us. All we are is just matter in motion, according to that point of view. And it says that everything got here by the laws of nature, the laws of matter. Now, many people believe that today, and it's taught in our schools. But we have to ask, is it rational? Is it justifiable? That's one alternative. The other alternative denies what that one alternative states. The other is supernaturalism, and it says all there is not nature. There is more to reality than just nature itself, than just the atoms and the molecules and the forces that make up the physical world. There's something beyond it. You can call it spiritual. There are various ways of putting it. Non-material. But the essence of it is it's not of this physical order, this physical world. So it's supernatural. It transcends the world. That's why that view is sometimes called transcendentalism, from transcendent. Transcendentalism as opposed to naturalism. Now those are the broadest worldviews. Somebody says, yeah, but what about Darwinism? Well, think about it. Darwinism is a form of naturalism, which tries to explain everything in terms of the laws of nature. Someone says, yeah, but what about pantheism that the Hindus believe? Well, consider it. Pantheism is a kind of theism, although it's sort of a fake theism. It isn't, as it's usually articulated, not a true theism, but it's a sort of theism that's of the supernatural or transcendent order. So it falls into the other category. Again, as you continue to look at this, you realize that every point of view ever held by man can be subsumed under one or the other of these broadest of umbrellas, naturalism or supernaturalism. Now, to bring it down to an everyday level, we usually would use words like this: evolution versus creation. So we'll think of it in those terms. And if you could demonstrate that there is no other alternative, and I think we've just shown that, we all practically see that. These are the only two options. And if you can falsify one of the options, show that there's something about that option that makes it absolutely impossible to be true, then what have you done? Obviously, you have thereby demonstrated the other alternative. This is simple logic, common sense. And by the way, it is a formal logical argument, and it is valid. Yes, you can falsify one of the disjuncts, it's called, of the either-or pair. You have either evolution or creation. Can you falsify evolution or naturalism? Yes. Well, how could you do that? Well, if evolution, and someone says, are you talking about Darwinism? Well, Darwinism is a kind of evolution theory. It's the modern theory, neo-Darwinism usually it's called. There are now many evolutionists who are not necessarily Darwinists any longer. They tip their hat to what Darwin accomplished, but many of them have rejected his idea that natural selection is the explanation for the transformation of species. They think there must be some other way. But at root, they are still evolutionists. They believe that all life has come from the simplest of all life forms at the beginning. There was the simple beginning life, and everything else has descended from that. So in essence, they are evolutionists. So we're looking at evolution in the broadest sense. Now, for any kind of evolution theory to be true, whether it be that of Empedocles of the ancient Greeks or that of Darwin, for example, today, then there are certain things that would have to also be true. Just by definition, if life arose by sheer chance, if life is here by the forces of nature alone, then life had to originate from that which was not life. Chemistry that's not living. Today some would balk at talking about the origin of life. Modernists like to talk about the emergence of life. The only difference is it spreads it out. The origin of life sounds like it happened all at once. The emergence of life sounds like it took a long time. Well, still the same idea. Nothing has changed, whichever term you choose, origin or the emergence of life. The word abiogenesis means life from non-life. Genesis of life from that which was not living. That word is sometimes called biogenesis as well. It's just a synonym. Sometimes called spontaneous generation, but that's not the most accurate way to put it when we're thinking about the beginning of all living things. So abiogenesis is the preferred idea. Life from that which is not life. And ultimately it depends on two things: the laws of nature and chance. The laws of nature and chance, randomness. So ultimately chance, just accident, will explain how that beginning life happened. So if evolution were true, it had to happen in some way. Life had to emerge from non-living chemistry. Secondly, the earliest life is not what we are. We don't look like amoeba or bacteria. We are rather very complex. So how did we get here? Well, evolution theory of any kind has to say there was some kind of mechanism that would change one life form into another life form. And of course, by evolution, to higher and higher life forms. So you start with the simplest, a single cell, for example, and you end up with us, multicellular, very complex creatures. There has to be some kind of mechanism, something that can explain how life can be changed one form into another. Now that goes without saying. Whatever kind of evolution theory you choose, whether Darwinism, neo-Darwinism, or whatever, that goes without saying. Then there are two other things that would generally follow. We would expect this. The record of life and its development as found in the fossils. The fossil record should be consistent with that point of view. If life emerged by evolution, well then the fossil record should support that and not be against it. It should be consistent with that. And last of all, there would have to be enough time in this world, or in all worlds, in the physical universe, there'd have to be enough time for this slow, gradual emergence, because no one can possibly believe that it happened all at once. That's just a miracle within itself. And this point of view is trying to get away from miracles, so it wants to look at natural causes that happen by accident slowly over time. You'd have to have enough time. Abiogenesis would have to happen. There'd have to be an adequate mechanism for the transformation of species. The fossil record should be consistent with evolution. And last of all, you'd have to have enough time for it to all happen. Now, those four things you can put together, by the way. And this is logic too. You can put all four of those together in a compound consequent to this hypothetical argument. When you do that, you make them all equal, so that if any one of the four is shown to be false, the entire system is false. In other words, if you say for evolution to be true, there had to be enough time, and you can falsify enough time, then evolution can't be true. If you say for evolution to be true, abiogenesis had to have happened at some point, and if you can show it's impossible for abiogenesis to have happened, then you have falsified evolution itself. Now, I think we can falsify all four of these elements, all four that have been mentioned, but any one would suffice. And we'll particularly look at that of abiogenesis. To disprove it, we therefore can disprove Darwinism. So, we'll look at abiogenesis. For evolution to be true, life had to happen some way on its own, by itself. It wasn't planned or purposed, it just happened. And yet, there have been many scientists who have studied the complexity of even the simplest life forms, single-cell creatures. And they have also applied mathematical theory to this study. And by the theory of the science of probability reasoning, have determined that it's mathematically impossible for the chemicals, by the laws of nature as we understand them, so to arrange themselves at random as to produce even the simplest life form. A number of years ago, I came into possession of a book written by Dr. James Coppedge. Now, Dr. Coppedge is a biologist, a professional biologist, and he studies fantastically improbable chances we give to chance, or possibilities. Let's just say that all the atoms in the universe at once are pairing up and unpairing at a rate of, nanoseconds, thousands of times per second. They're pairing up and unpairing at rate. This is not really randomness. This is just giving huge concessions to the evolutionists just for the sake of argument, to show how impossible his view is. And if this were happening, what would it take for a single protein molecule, and proteins are the building blocks of all life, every living thing, trees and birds and fish and humans and paramecia are all made of these protein molecules. For that to have happened, a single protein molecule, the odds or the chances of that happening are 10 to the 161st power to 1 that it wouldn't happen. 10 to the 161st power. Now, I wasn't very good in arithmetic, so I have to rely on the authorities. That's the number 10 followed by 100, or the number 1 followed by 161 zeros. No, 10 followed by 161 zeros. I don't know. I tried to look that up one time, what kind of zillions or quintillions or whatever it would be. And it's hard to know this. It's a big number, 161st power. Somebody could probably look that up. But why does that matter? It's just one protein, and it takes a lot more than just protein to make a living creature, even a simple creature. There was a mathematician, Dr. Emile Borel, who studied probability theory, and he came to this conclusion. Any number that has more than 50 zeros in the exponent, in other words, 10 to the 50th power or greater, is an event that will not happen. We can say with assurance, it will not happen. Now, hypothetically, somebody in his mind could imagine maybe it could happen, but he says it will not happen given the laws of chance. And yet we're talking about protein coming about, the odds being 10 to the 161st power. That's about 3 times beyond the threshold that Dr. Borel mentioned for anything happening by sheer chance. Now, that's a while ago that was written. More recently, so much good material has come out, and you can find this. You can order this from Amazon. You can read this. You can get anywhere. I'm just not putting a plug for that one group. You can go to the libraries. You can find it online, and you can become aware of this information. Dr. Michael Denton is a British Australian and now in Britain philosopher and biologist, particularly biologist, who has come to question Darwinian theory, evolutionary theory. I don't think he's quite where we are. He's not quite a creationist. but he's definitely a skeptic of evolutionism. And he's written a number of good books on this subject about evolution, in which he also supports this idea that the odds are against abiogenesis. Also, Drs. Bradley, Thaxton, and Olson wrote a book called The Mystery of Life's Origin, where they talk about the simplest life form we know that we've ever found. And it's a bacterium known as E. coli. We've heard of that a lot. It's a bad thing. E. coli. It's the simplest life form that we've ever studied. And in order for it to exist, it would take 4 million specified instructions for it to exist. Biological instructions that are built into the genetic code of this one simplest of all life, simple bacterium, E. coli. 4 million bits of information for this simplest life. And we know that the information itself is encoded in the DNA molecule, and it is a literal language. Dr. Michael Behe from Lehigh University, also a professional biologist, a man who has studied. I haven't been able to study biology in that way, but there are many competent scholars who have, and we can appeal to their work and profit from it. Wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box, in which he spoke of irreducible complexity and also spoke of the impossibility of abiogenesis. There are others, such as Dr. William Dembski, also a mathematician and very adept at this area and one who studied biology, who has explained the impossibility of abiogenesis. Dr. Stephen Meyer also has written much on this subject, and he's very conversant. He's had a number of debates. He's often found on the internet. He's a very articulate spokesman for the theory of intelligent design. And you have a number of others. Jonathan Wells, Dr. Jonathan Wells, his books are very helpful to find. Also a professional biologist with a degree from the University of California at Berkeley. Now, we're not talking about those who've gotten their Cracker Jacks box degrees from a podunk school. We're talking about people who go to the most prestigious institutions in the world. Douglas Axe, Dr. Douglas Axe, a graduate in biology from Caltech University, then who did postdoctoral work at Cambridge University for a number of years. Some of his work is the very best in demonstrating the impossibility of genetic mutations creating any useful matter that would allow a transformation of species. That's normally what evolution theory of any kind would say, that there are flukes in the genetic code that happen by accident and nature may act on. That's a type of neo-Darwinism to bring it about. But abiogenesis is a mathematical impossibility. It is a biochemical impossibility. I don't know if that bored you or if you let that just sink in for a moment. To say abiogenesis is a biochemical impossibility, and we can affirm that, it's impossible, is to say evolution theory of any kind cannot be right. Is to say naturalism as a worldview is wrong. Materialism cannot be right. And it is to say the only thing that can be right is the alternative we mentioned. And there is but one alternative, and that's supernaturalism or transcendentalism, which we commonly would call creationism. Just let us sink in what we've demonstrated. We could look at genetic mutations, the so-called mechanism that would have to exist for evolution to be true. They cannot explain it. There are so few mutations that happen. Most are harmful, almost all ever studied, and they've never been observed to produce any beneficial adaptation to cross from one species to the next, even at the lowest level. We can look at the fossil record if we had time. It contains tremendous gaps. That's not what you would expect if evolution theory were true. And it contains what is known as the Cambrian explosion, which also is inconsistent. All of a sudden you have all these developed phyla, almost all the phyla that are represented on Earth today, and classes are there at that level. And that's not what you would find if you had true Darwinian development. And then there is much evidence that the Earth is young, as moon dust, for example, the Earth's magnetic field. And let me add, while a number of these men I quoted a while ago are not young earthers, as we would be because of our commitment to the biblical view of origins, creation, many of them have used an argument similar, but they would argue that there are millions of years to the age of the Earth, and that's not enough time. Even given billions of years, 3.8 for the universe, that's not enough time mathematically for the development of evolution of any kind. So there's not enough time. It is falsified. And then we can know there must be a creative intelligence behind it all. That's what's implied by creation. Now this tells me something else. When I realize this, it jibes with what I already instinctively knew about my feelings of conscience. Suppose I'd never heard that. Now suddenly I'm confronted with something that's kind of an aha moment. This explains why I feel that some things are wrong from time to time. This is why I think some things have to be done. They're right. Always right. How could that be in a world that's purely material? Well, it can be in a world that was made by God, who is the standard of right and wrong. So this perfectly fits our own concept of morality. So this means we live in a universe that is haunted. It is a universe that is haunted by a spiritual entity, the creator of it all. This means that it is a universe that can permit the supernatural. It is a universe that could allow for, from time to time, the changing of the laws of nature by that creator who made those laws. Miracles are possible. Now there's a story that's told by an ancient people, the Hebrews. It is a story that's found in their sacred book. Genesis 1 and 2 contains it. It's the story of creation by just such a creature, or creator rather. And this creator that's described in Genesis 1 and 2 fits perfectly the kind of intelligence that's behind the universe that we saw from science and philosophy. These Hebrew scriptures claim to be the word of that creator. They claim to be the word of God. And in order to demonstrate that, they have done things like setting forth predictive prophecies, predicting events way off in the future that will come to pass exactly as predicted, showing only God could have told the prophet about that. Only God could have known the future. Deuteronomy chapter 18 talks about such prophecies and prophets. Isaiah chapter 42 and verse 9 speaks of how this is evidence for God and His wisdom. Now these texts also record historically many miracles that were performed by people like Moses and later by the prophet Elijah and others. And these are found in records that are historically reliable. They've been demonstrated such time and again by the science of archaeology in areas that can be verified, so we presume that these stories that cannot be directly verified are also true, the stories of the miracles. Somebody says, well, how can you believe such a thing as a miracle? Because we live in a haunted universe. We're not bound to materialism. Now, if materialism were true, naturalism were the case, of course you'd have to reject the miracles. Of course. They couldn't happen because they don't conform to the laws of nature. And if nature is all there is, they're ruled out by definition. But we've already seen that we're not bound to naturalism. This is a world that is transcendent. There's something beyond this world. So miracles can happen. It is not illogical to believe in the possibility of miracles. And these same scriptures that claim to be produced by a miracle predict the coming of a Messiah, a Redeemer. And it gives hints that He would be divine, as Paul the Apostle reasoned with his Jewish brethren in the synagogues. In Isaiah 9, 6, and 7, a child was born unto us. His name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Oh, if that doesn't send chills up your spine to read that passage. This child that's born will be called the Mighty God. That's as strong a language as you could possibly use to describe the God of heaven. The Everlasting Father. He's the child who's born to us. This shows that this child born of a virgin, mentioned in Isaiah 7:14, whose name would be Emmanuel, meaning God with us, is God with us in a very real, literal sense. So this would lead us to looking at the evidences for this man, who he was, and when he lived. The Lord willing, we will pursue that line of thought this evening and come to study more about evidences for the truth of Christianity itself. But to this point, what we've established is we're not bound by blind faith. Our knowledge of God isn't a leap of faith in the dark. Rather, we have strong evidences by which we can demonstrate that these claims are true. They're true for everybody. These claims of Christianity are true for Supreme Court justices, public school teachers, media personalities, foreign dignitaries, the average guy on the street. It's true for everybody and not just for us. and can be demonstrated as such. The evidence is overwhelmingly are in favor of a world created by God, a world in which miracles are possible, a world in which the Hebrew people brought a knowledge of the Messiah that would come as the Redeemer. Because along with this idea of morality from God comes the knowledge we have failed, and comes the view of sin. Sin is a violation of the will of God, and something has to be done to solve that problem. The world's religions have grappled with it and have failed. They cannot adequately deal with it, but there's one that can, the Christianity of the New Testament. And that we will study this evening, the Lord willing. This morning, if you have been struggling and wrestling with doubt, if you have been having faith issues, don't continue to live in uncertainty. Know that we have the best evidence on our side. And it's not because it's ours. It's because God has blessed us with teachers to come our way to show us this is the truth. And it's been given to many of us on a silver platter, as it were. For that we should ever be thankful. If you need to ask for the prayers of the church for sin in your life, do that. If you need to be baptized for the remission of sins and become a child of God this morning, do that while together we stand and sing.